Christian Dior is often portrayed as an idealist who exalted womanhood by praising flower women and the eternal feminine. At the same time, he is criticized for putting women back into corsets, upholstering them, thereby reducing them to mere objects of masculine desire. While idealism and cynicism about women are the twin fruits on the same branch, and they can be met in art and literature, mixed in any proportion, the study of Dior's archives reveals his astute insight into the feminine psychology, his profound humanism, and his sincere belief that couture could enhance and transfigure not only women's bodies, but their inner selves. Christian Dior belonged to the golden age of couture, when a couturier, in the words of Balenciaga, had to be an architect for design, a sculptor for shape, a painter for color, a musician for harmony, and a philosopher for measure. Being an architect by training, Christian Dior inscribed into his dress designs the quintessence of the European philosophy that we will try to decipher today. Christian Dior was in a habit of giving names to every dress that he created in a little sacrament of baptism, as he called it. And among these names, there are such personal characteristics of vices as jealousy, envy, malice, avarice, indiscretion, rivalry, vanity, and so on, which fit into the lower stratum of personality and which may come as a surprise to the idealized vision of this couturier. Obviously, there are names from the positive spectrum, such as love, happiness, smile, tenderness, patience, hope, innocence, constancy, assiduity. The models dressed this way represented the various selves or facets of personality. Back then, the house had a permanent staff of models that Christian Dior knew not only by name, but had a very discerning insight into their personality. And he assigned a dress to a particular model based on the final meaning that he tried to achieve. While presenting their dresses, models would assume poses or use accessories such as a spiky umbrella, gloves, voile, and a hat for cachotier or concealer, or a deep décolleté with ruffles for vanity, or, on the contrary, a soft fur clutch for darling. By their poses and facial expressions, models conveyed the character that they incarnated. While this type of theatricality has become unusual in the fast-paced fashion of today, it stems from the centuries-old allegorical tradition. Already in the Hellenistic thought, vices and virtues started being represented as maidens, and the soul as a tug-of-war between right and wrong through the metaphor of the physical combat. This concept was further developed in Christian writings, notably by St. Paul, but it reached its fullest and most influential articulation in the 5th century Psychomachia by Prudentius. It was followed by centuries by pilgrimage literature, presenting the hero in dilemma between soft implorations of virtue and the angry claws of vice. This literature gave rise to new iconography, providing abstract concepts with tangible and persuasive imagery. Vices particularly inspired artists. Greed, avarice, envy, jealousy appear especially repulsive, equipped with multiple attributes revealing their foul nature. Shortly, allegories were to inhabit illuminated manuscripts and church interiors, gardens, libraries, and palaces. During the Baroque period, they allowed artists to delight in representation of beautiful maidens in eloquent poses. Certain canvases of moral battlefield reached truly epic scale, including allegories, mythology, and personal preferences of patrons. All this art revolves around the central concept of free will and the ensuing moral responsibility for individual choice. Dior's archives actually feature a model called La Voie de la Vertu, or Path of Virtue, which most probably refers to the famous parable of Hercules at the crossroad, surrounded by two beautiful maidens, one representing the path of virtue and the other surrounded with attributes of sensory pleasures, representing the path of vice. At first, allegory was homiletic, but soon it gave propitious offshoots into the erotic and romantic spheres. Courtly love literature abounds in personifications of gentle manners and tender feelings. All shades and stages of amorous relationships can be encountered in Dior's collections, such as coquette, compliment, love letter, hot stealer, seduction, romance, liaison, love, everything that pertains to the art of pleasing and its patron, Venus or Aphrodite. This has earned some opprobrium from the feminist audience of Dior, but this type of literature was often commissioned by or dedicated to the illustrious women of the time. What is more, it advocated not only a certain type of love, but a certain type of humanistic ideal. The final destination of the allegorical quest would be a walled garden, either sacred, the divine precinct of the soul, or the garden of pleasure and delights. Christian Dior's attachment to his garden in Granville is well known. My life, my style, owe almost everything to its architecture, he used to say. The coastal estate was exposed to the ocean winds, but in the middle of it was a lush rose garden with precious and fragile flowers, fenced by circles of protective installations. Dior himself designed the pergola with a little pool and fountain. The garden's topography is very similar to that of the Roman de la Rose, the 13th century allegorical poem that claimed to contain the whole art of love. The central locus of the poem is the fountain of Narcissus, or the mirror perilous, in the middle of the garden. By its very name, the fountain warns the lover that his feelings could be a mere narcissistic illusion. Christian Dior was well aware of this pitfall. Some women do not exist unless they are admired, he used to say. The fountain of love is a test of the lover's capacity to choose an appropriate love object, since love is the recognition of identity. Eventually, he falls in love with a lady, represented by the rosebud. Once I smelled the perfume more, I had no power then to withdraw. All evil seems to be banished from the garden's interior, represented by the figurines of avarice, sadness, hatred, despair, villainy, felony, jealousy, languishing on its outside walls. We have encountered most of these names in Dior's collections. Only those who have overcome vile impulses and vicious effects can access the fountain of love. The two planes of the garden are suspended in this state of tension. The outer space exposed to travails and vicissitudes of life, and the inner space of repose, safety, and deliverance. Courtly love literature developed the trope of the garden of love as a place where carnality and perfectibility, rather than being mutually exclusive as they are in Christianity or in certain branches of feminism, are reciprocally necessary. Behind its frivolous form, this literature promoted the profound truth that the world of spiritual purity and sensuous delight need not and perhaps cannot be divided. This view flourished during Renaissance, particularly in Florence, in the so-called Neoplatonic Academy, responsible for some of the most admired masterpieces to date. Unfortunately, in the history of culture, periods of equilibrium between sense and sensuality were always precarious and short-lived. These ideas were confined to elitist intellectual circles. When they trickled down and spread, they quickly lost their spiritual essence and degenerated into unbridled sensuality, which in its turn was superseded by more or less violent ascetic reaction. Such were the fires of the monk Savonarola that consumed some of the masterpieces of the previous period. I am mentioning this trend because it is not without parallel with the history of the Dior brand, although to a much softer degree appropriate for the modern secular luxury environment. What these multiple references to the allegorical quest and to the Garden of Love underline in Dior's collections is that for him, human life is a process of becoming rather than a state of being. That human nature is to be honored not by transcending its inherent contradiction and mutability, but by an immersion in the play of paradox and ambiguity. Quite a number of Dior's models are called ambigu, pile-face, volte-face. Approximately at the same time, Carl Jung formulated this concept in his psychoanalysis. To round itself up, life calls not for perfection, but for completeness. Cruot, the collaborator of Christian Dior and the illustrator of the brand from its very beginnings and into the late 70s, used to say that within each woman there is every woman, and that the role of the perfume was to reveal the woman to herself. He actually called this type of woman la femme multifacette, or multifaceted woman. For the advertisement of 3 Dior perfumes, he portrayed 3 mysteriously caped women, so reminiscent of the iconography of the triple goddess that we primarily know from the Greek mythology, but who existed in many other traditions. This threefold goddess presided over all acts of generation, physical, spiritual, and intellectual. In different forms, she remained in poetry, whether in the realm of the mothers in Goethe's Faust or in the guise of the witches in Shakespeare's Macbeth. She is the guardian of the world of forms and ideas, often in control of a cauldron that can be compared to the perfume bottle, since the etymology of the word perfumes stems from through smoke or smoke from burning substances. Christian Dior also referred to his female collaborators as an exalted triumvirate that comprised Raymond Zernecker, Marguerite Carré, and Mitza Bricard. He considered couture to be expression poétique, and in 1948, Robert Graves described the poetic sway of the trident goddess in his well-researched and controversial book, The White Goddess. In it, he claims that true poets continue to worship her and are honored with her gift of the poetic insight. Dior was fond of signs and symbols to the point of being superstitious, and this probably explains why he excluded from this triumvirate a very important female figure, both in his personal and professional life. It was Suzanne Lulling, his childhood friend from Granville, who left a book of invaluable reminiscences on the house. During the lifetime of Dior, she managed client and public relations, threw parties and held photo sessions in her apartment. Certainly, it was not lack of appreciation on behalf of Dior, but rather veneration of the mystical symbolism of the feminine in his own artistic and literary work. At the same time, Christian Dior did not fall into the fallacy of Paris and other famous lovers of succumbing to the charms of a single goddess and neglecting all the others that ultimately led to their perdition. But he equally valued all aspects of the feminine that these women represented and described them in great and loving detail. Indeed, Christian Dior had a particular preoccupation with wholeness. He often spoke of a collection as a whole, of a silhouette as a whole, of a need to sacrifice a beautiful but extraneous detail to the general harmony. Wholeness is the cornerstone of the classical philosophy of aesthetics. It is described by Alexander Pope as all about parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul. One of the favorite symbols of Christian Dior, still very present at the brand today, was La Rose des Vents, which reflects harmony within great variety and complexity of forms, within opposites of infinite extension. It reflects the divine providence and the capacity of the microcosm to reproduce the complexity and the beauty of the universe as a whole. Within the individual psyche, wholeness is achieved through integration of the lower elements, such as jealousy, envy, avarice, malice, and so on, with the help of the upper ones, such as love, happiness, tenderness, patience, and so on. In her reminiscences, Suzanne Lulling documented that within his inner circle, Christian Dior used to distinguish different stages of personal maturity. He often spoke of somebody as être, individu, or personne. Writings by Christian Dior reveal his profound concern for the efflorescence of the individual, that he dressed, that he perfumed, and he adorned. Hence, his frequent comparisons of women to flowers. The bond between woman and plant can be followed through all stages of human symbolism. The psyche as a flower, lotus, lily, a rose, symbolizes the flower-like unfolding of spiritual development. Birth from the female blossom is an archetypal form of the divine birth, whether we speak of Ra in Egypt, of the Buddha's divine treasure in the lotus, or the representation of the Christian Theotokos by the rose. For the creation of his first perfume, Christian Dior requested, "Faites-moi un parfum qui sent l'amour." Make me a perfume that exudes love. The Baccarat perfume bottle that appeared a few years later was adorned with a golden branch of lilies and roses. It resembled multiple golden roses that popes have blessed on the fourth Sunday of Lent and sent to distinguished individuals or religious communities, at least since the 11th century. The day set apart for this function represents love after hate, joy after sorrow, and prosperity after hunger. The rose is compared to the flower referred to in Isaiah. There will come forth a rod out of the root of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of this root. In Mary, the Creator is united with his creation. The incarnation of Christ was a sign of re-establishment of love between God and man. For Christian Dior, his creations were to symbolize the re-establishment of love and hope after the devastation and the despair of the war. There is a picture of a fitting in the studio where Christian Dior, seated in front of a model, is pointing at a button on her coat with a stick. On the face of it, there is nothing unusual about it, since back then it was inconsiderate and inappropriate for a man to touch a woman directly. But the composition of this photograph reproduces one of the iconographic patterns of the Annunciation scene. It appeared between the 12th and the 13th centuries. The angel is represented as a knight bending his knee in front of the lady, which was a habit of the court life. According to the Golden Legend, the Virgin gave her consent by spreading her hands and raising her eyes to the heavens. Most of Dior's creations, his writings, even his signature, refer to the Christian symbolism. Visual references to Catholic Mariology are still present in the modern iconography of Miss Dior advertisement, notably Madonna in the Rose Bower. The idea of love is the very axis of the Dior brand philosophy, which in its turn is deeply rooted in the Neoplatonic tradition because of the sensuous character of this love. According to this tradition, love is the power that forces God to effuse himself into the world and inversely causes his creatures to seek reunion with him. Amour or love is another name for the self-reverting current from God to the world and from the world to God. The loving individual inserts herself into this mystical circuit. This concept is very similar to the practice of whirling dervishes in Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam. According to certain dervishes, their ecstatic dance reproduces that of the angels and has both cosmic and theological character. The circle of dancers is divided into two semicircles. One represents the arc of descent or involution of souls into matter, and the other, the arc of ascent of souls to God. Rumi, the founder of this movement in Islam in the 13th century, used to say, "Without love, this world would be inanimate." The circular upward movement is inscribed into multiple sartorial elements of the house of Dior, such as drapé spirale, that brings up the motif of the Assumption and of the Baroque whirlpools of fabrics and clouds. Skirt fabric is bent and draped in spiral-shaped lines. Those models are called girouette, pirouette, cyclone, tourbillon, dancing terms or natural phenomena that express the circular movement. In défilés, models represented clothes swinging and waltzing, which made their skirts soar and twirl and conveyed ethereal aspect to women. Similarly to artists who expressed the Neoplatonic ideals with a brush or a chisel, Christian Dior used sartorial means for the same purpose and effect. For example, the wings of the soul described by Plato in his dialogues, which grow when we are seized by the fever of love, and which are the manifestation of the divine Eros, are literally expressed in the Envol and Elie collections in 1948, which means winged and flight. Illustrations by Cruot capture the ecstatic movement reminiscent of the Menard dances that Loie Fuller made very popular at Folies Bergère in Paris at the turn of the century, where Cruot's mother was a dancer. Ecstasy is another product name in the Dior brand. Love alone lifts and transfigures human nature. It compels the body to partake of the light and the light to combine with the body. It sublimates the matter to its highest possible ennoblement. Light and lightness permeate most of Dior's creations and continue to animate the brand today. Therefore, I would like to end this part dedicated to Christian Dior with the lines closing the Divine Comedy of Dante. My own wings were far too weak for that, but my desire and will were moved already like a wheel, revolving uniformly by love that moves the sun and the other stars.